afternoon. I'm glad to see we've all stayed for the best panel of the day. Maybe a few lacking in there, but we need to tell all those people who have got drinks in the other room that this is the place to be. But it's great to have you here, and I've got a fantastic panel, so I'm going to ask them to come up and join me now, and then I'll run on. So why don't you all come up, all those panelists, and I'll just quickly run through who we've got on the panel here today. So we've got Kathryn, who you've seen if you've been here for the last couple of days. Kathryn, who's the CEO of Decoded. We've got Shiva, who I think many of you have seen earlier on from WeWork, who's fab. Here's Kathryn. Kathryn, come and have a seat. We've also got Joanna. Where's Joanna? Oh, there she is. Hi, Joanna. How are you doing? We've got Joanna Shields, who, again, I'm sure some of you saw yesterday. Nice to see you. Enjoyed this.
Thank you.
And we've got Liz Erickson. Hi, Liz, who's come from McKinsey and amongst other places. Great to see you. And we've got Deep, who's from SoftBank, of course, who have been such amazing sponsors and supporters of the event. Fabulous to have you here. So great, thank you. So we've had a great couple of days. There's been some amazing things going on. And we've talked about everything from the technical aspects of AI and how we're going to, change the way we travel and change the way we do everything. But of course, right at the bottom of all that is the challenge of, do we actually have the right skills to do all this amazing stuff over the next few years? And really what I wanted to talk with the panel was to sort of get a sense of what does that skill base look like? And actually, are we in the right position to do it? Now, I can look pretty parochially from a UK perspective, but you guys can share some best practice, I'm sure, from around the world or from your experience generally, which would be great. Because one of the scary statistics I wanted to kick this off with is that we think about, we've heard from universities, we've heard from other people, but in fact, if you look at the workforce of 2030, so that's 12 years out, seems quite a long way away, 2/3 of those people have left the education system. So this is not an education, let's not fix the universities or fix the schools, we might have to do that, but we actually have to reskill our workforce. We have to reskill the people who are out there today. And so I really wanted to go through and talk to the panel about maybe the experiences I've had for that and maybe some of the kind of sense of, what that looks like. So I'm going to actually start with Joanna, because I know Joanna, but not a tricky question, Joanna, really just a bit of a sense from you with the lots of things you've been involved with government and with private companies and obviously now with BenevolentAI and so on. Do you think it's all in place? Do you think we're okay? Is all the system working? Are we going to pop out with all the right skills, or do we need to be thinking a bit more about this?
Wow. I actually think that there's this profound anxiety that people have. I mean, I think it comes from a place of, they just don't understand what this all means. But in reality, they're already experiencing it every day in their lives. Like every time you engage with a chat bot, sometimes you have a bad experience, but you get through it. And it's not that intimidating. It actually works and it facilitates whatever you're trying to accomplish. And I think we just need to somehow help people get over the anxiety of this and start to look at it as like part of their world, part of their lives. And, I think that's really important. And I'm going to give a plug to Cognition X because they've just released this platform that is basically an expert network around all issues relating to artificial intelligence for human resource managers. And this is really important. And I think the fact that we've had 7,000 people come together at this conference, this Festival of AI, there's just a huge interest in it. And the community that's being created around it by organizations like Cognition X, I think is really important.
I mean, that's really good. And if you look from, Kathryn, from your perspective, I mean, obviously in Decoded, you're getting to, 250,000 people or whatever so far to reskill them in coding and such like. Do you find that when you do that, are those generally the enlightened companies who are doing that, or are you getting the kind of builder's merchant from Birmingham who's coming to you? Are they, what sort of people are going for this? Is it everyone, or is it, is it a selected group of people?
I think it's interesting to interrogate the DNA of what was behind the business that we started in 2012, but why did that resonate so widely? We've had over 10,000 businesses come through our doors, right from board level of, FTSE and Fortune companies through to small SMEs and in over 85 different cities across the world. And I think what that shows is that the fear is universal. The feeling of a lack of understanding of these technologies is universal. The whole mission was to decode technologies, take away the fear and the mystery and the cliches, but teach people really quickly as well. And I thought it was interesting, on the first panel that I was moderating, Paul Doherty at Accenture said that AI is this technology that he's never seen anything in his 32 years, which has been impacting business so quickly. Yeah. But actually, human beings don't change that quickly. And so everything is pointing towards skills, leadership, and culture change. And you need all three of those elements to embed this. So does the board actually understand what AI is, what an API is even? And for me, understanding is about getting hands-on with these technologies. And is there a culture within which, rather than saying, right, I need to hire 100 data scientists, which is the new kind of buzzword, what do they actually mean by that? What do you need them to do? What challenges and problems are you solving? You are solving incredible challenges within your business. Do you actually have data sets that those people can work with before you even begin to upskill them? And to be honest, the reason that we are now creating data analysts, 18-month courses, actually creating accredited skill sets and communities of data scientists within businesses, because where else can you go to do that? More as a response to the need from business.
And it is interesting, and and the danger is, we talk here and the word data set, those sorts of things. If I went to my locals builders merchant and said, what's your data sets like? He'd probably say we don't sell those or something, because they don't really talk the same language. And I just wonder, it's interesting, I've been involved very much in the productivity work, and as you know, in the UK, and there are a few other nations represented here, the productivity is very low relative to other nations. And one of the key things, of course, we can do is to digitize further. That would help us in the productivity. But if you ask people, if you ask businesses in the UK whether they're as productive or more productive than their peers, 90% will say they are. The real figure is less than 40%. So in other words, there's a perception that people are kind of okay, it's all working, and yet there's a kind of burning platform of, competition from around the world, certainly low productivity in the UK, and I just wonder how we can, go over that. I don't know whether Liz, maybe just because McKinsey have done a lot of thinking and they've been working with me and others in the productivity space. I just wonder what you see in terms of that skilling around the world in some of the areas that you've been involved in.
Yeah, so we've looked a lot at what are the types of skills that are being affected most, and a lot of, if you think of a spectrum of highly manual skills that our forefathers 500 years ago were doing, versus sort of on the spectrum to more high cognitive skills through to social and technological skills, we actually see a growing need of some of these more complex, more problem solving, or just the ability to ask great questions. And I think that regardless of where you think about where you're coming from, whether you're a builder running his own business versus the CEO of a 10,000 person company or a 100,000 person company, everybody actually knows what questions hopefully they know what questions they're trying to solve or trying to answer. And I think this idea that Kathryn was talking around about demystifying and helping us see that there's an element of asking great questions that's going to be a fundamental skill no matter how far we go. And the more that we can automate the stuff where machines really are better at doing lots and lots of sums, it's the same thing that computers figured out 50 years ago, the more time we have to focus human skills on the problems where humans really are better. And I think that when you think about the skill gaps that exist, there is very much a gap around, are we able to ask the right questions? When I talk to all my clients, most of them are saying, well, okay, I know there's this data thing over here, and I want to look at something that happened before. And you think, but what if you asked about what could happen? And training people in how to think, knowing that there's this arsenal of tools there to help you get to a much better answer than you could, I think is an important part of it. I think there's a second piece which says, okay, well, that sounds fantastic for you, people who went to four-year university and then went on to McKinsey like all of us went to Google.
Exactly.
Terrifying. But what about the hundreds of thousands of people who don't have the natural ability to ask better questions tomorrow? And I think there is an element of how do we think about retraining and redeploying, but not necessarily saying everybody needs to go and become a Google engineer and be able to code the next AI bot, but understanding what are going to be the complementary skill sets that will continue to exist. And I think that's the part where I remain an optimist as opposed to let's be terrified about the skills gap.
And I agree. Indeed, you had a real perspective. We were chatting earlier about this idea of continuing to learn. I mean, maybe you could just share a bit of your thoughts on that, because I think that's important that people get into this culture of continuing to relearn and not just assuming I've done my thing and then that's it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the talk around AI is based on two fundamental human emotions. One is fear of the unknown. We don't know what this brings, and we hear all kinds of stories, and the robot overlords will rule us very soon, and all the sci-fi movies and so on. So that's one thing, and that's natural, right? We have to accept it. The second is, though, which is I think a false premise, which is assuming that we will not adapt. Ever seen a 2-year-old pick up an iPad and within like 2 seconds start swiping? Who taught the 2-year-old that you could do that, right? They just watch someone, and all of a sudden they become masterminds at using an amazing piece of technology. My 80-year-old mother, 15 years ago when I joined Google, didn't understand what Google was, didn't know what the internet was. Today, she's FaceTiming with her granddaughter because she wants to.
Motivation.
And it doesn't matter to her that VoIP technology has become so much better. The codecs behind FaceTime are like so much better than they were 20 years ago, and we did like all this work with Grace Note and this, and like it's invisible. And that's the beauty of technology today, is it becomes invisible. So as long as, as many of the fellow panelists have talked about, we are optimistic, open-minded, willing to learn, which I think human beings are. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit on that. Like if my 80-year-old mother can figure out how to FaceTime, I think we all have hope in terms of understanding and learning these things. Also knowing that not all of us need to be Google class engineers. And 5, continue to learn and accept. So at a country level, I think rather than being alarmist and legislators have a way of trying to get votes by drumming up fear, embrace AI. China is a great example of it. They have made AI a national priority, and they have allocated hundreds of billions of dollars a year. On the other hand, the US has decided that we still need to fight to save coal-fired power plants. AI, coal-fired power plants, okay? I mean, we are making choices here. For organizations, I think we have to make AI a core differentiator. It cannot be the purview of the chief innovation officer or the chief digital officer sitting somewhere here who will work with Liz and the McKinsey team to figure out how AI should be part of it. No, AI has to be infused in everything you do, whether you're an insurance company, a bank, a builder. Imagine how much waste happens in construction sites because they cannot forecast how the scheduling should happen. I mean, there are tools available to do that. And at an individual level, we have to all recognize that the only constant in life is change, and that change is happening faster today than it did 50 years ago.
And I fear to some degree that that's something that, a lot of us understand, but I do think there's a lot of people who don't. And Shiva, you might reflect on this a little bit, because obviously there's companies coming to you, and to some degree they're wanting you to do this thinking for them, really. They're saying, just make my life easier, put stuff in front of me, make it more efficient. You talked earlier about using AI to, kind of map the way people collaborate and so on. I mean, do you see anything of this, of people either kind of abdicating responsibility, or are they all just embracing it and saying, yeah, totally into this, it's all great,
It's a strange way to look at it, but the thing I study most is like the medieval guild. Okay, and the reason why I bring that up is that what's happening is like these basic skills are commoditized by AI. There's a thought process on top of it that I think is very interesting, right? And you can think of it this way. It's like you get data, you form insights, and then those insights effectively turn into bets. And what AI does is automate the production of bets. But there's this layer of human curation and creativity that would make that more successful. Sometimes just expanding the hypothesis space, and that's really important. So what we're trying to do at WeWork is, and this is also every company I've worked at, which is what's the nature of a functional guild in teaching people, bulletproofing them, strengthening them, So that they just get better at what they do, because actually schools don't teach us. Like, if you asked how I got my job, I was like, I got fucking lucky, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's like, there's no way I could go to school to become a product person right now. So spending a lot of time about how do we create that, particularly when it spans organizations, becomes very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because that feedback loop that really, because ultimately, if we're going to solve this problem on the large scale, we do need the education system, we do need, you know, the university system and so on to step up to this. And maybe we just have to wait. You know, maybe the enlightened people are going to do it, and then the others will eventually get there. But right now, the system doesn't look like it's flexible enough. I mean, frankly, if you go to most universities, you know, they sort of, sorry, anybody who's from university, they sort of decide the curriculum, they kind of consolidate it, they'll then teach it for the next number of years. You're already 10 years on from when you started this process. You know, 10 skills in 10 years' time, do we have any idea what those look like? Yeah. Probably not. So I think it's probably going to require a bit of an overlay onto the existing system, which might push down and change it over time. But I wonder if anybody has a bit of a sense, or even good examples of from around the world, where you think there are some nations who are really getting this right and are getting their nation into place. Anybody got any sort of sense of that? Kathryn, you got?
I would say we can't wait. You know, and actually that idea of the next generation are going to kind of solve this, and education is just churning out people who can organically and naturally understand and use technology is a total fantasy. I think there are some amazing things happening internationally in education reform and revolution. Anything from the École 42 school in Paris, the Vector Academy in Canada. But we need to be heavily investing in education institutes that are really rethinking how we teach people the skills of the future, and giving businesses incentives to invest in learning, not just as an away day or a nice to have, but absolutely as a business critical issue. And we do have the apprenticeship levy, which at least is one thing, but I mean, it would be nice to see a version of that was more focused on future facing digital data skills that are supremely relevant to the future of business.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's interesting in the UK, and Joanna can probably comment on this as well, but I mean, we've introduced apprenticeship levy, you know, 0.5% of your payroll, and apprentices have gone down massively. And, you know, part of it is because I think it's the same problem, which is the government's put in place something which is kind of like government speed, and then there's all the rest of everybody else going, that's great, but you've just taken a load of money on me that I'd like to use for reskilling my workforce. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the clock speed of government and the education systems and what we're really seeing in the last couple of days. You get any comment on Joanna, on the way that government is thinking about this? Because it's kind of fragmented, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for the government at this point because I'm no longer in the government.
No.
But I think what's really important as we're evolving sort of this conversation is that, you know, we as a community here need to communicate all the benefits that exist from AI. I think if we could do one thing from this conference, it would be to list the 50 things that are going to be better in your life because of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then get people more comfortable with it, and then start focusing on, as Kathryn's been saying and others have been saying, is the human augmentation of machines. Like, how do you, knowing that this is the new baseline, that we're all on this completely new, growth trajectory, and that's the new baseline, and AI is going to do all these wonderful things for you. How do you, as an individual, how do you, participate? What is the value you can add? And start thinking in that way, especially in the early stages of education, is how you, as a human being, are going to augment and use machines to improve the lives of your family, yourself, and others.
Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
I was going to say, I mean, there's an element to be learned here from some of the most successful brands in the world. You know, you look at what Adidas does around creating brand desire, right? So it doesn't start with what's the optimal shoe. They do a lot of thinking about that as well. But they spend a lot of time creating desire and demand. Sometimes it's solving a really technical problem, like a shoe that fixes your pronating running. Other times it's fixing the fact that you're desperately uncool, but if you have those trainers, you might be slightly cooler, or at least some people may think so. But if you think about, creating demand among every person. For somebody, it might be, I had a client and he was in finance and he was like, I'm not part of this analytics transformation, I don't get it. And then we helped him find $30 million worth of working capital by, and this is an amazing use case, right? More quickly connecting the payments coming into their bank account with the accounts receivable, which were taking 8 days because the computer was shit. And instead, it took seconds, and all of a sudden, he was like the biggest evangelist. And this isn't, this is not AI, this is like basic RPA. But all of a sudden, you had this guy banging on to 50 people in the company talking about how amazing this whole data thing was. And you just think about, well, what if you could find another 100,000 of them? And you think of it more like kind of mold in a petri dish. You don't need to figure out how to cover the whole thing. You seed it with some sugar, you put in some water and some yeast, and eventually over time it'll grow. But I think that while you do need focus, and there are some great examples of task forces around the world of people saying, this matters and we will put effort into it, it's also not getting too close up to it and letting lots of grassroots efforts, whether it's somebody deciding to start something in their kid's school around saying we're going to do a kids coding camp on the weekend, or thinking about SAP who said we're going to retrain a third of our folks, and trusting sort of almost in a blockchain kind of way that the system can sort itself out.
And I think you could argue in that sense that actually it's fine for all of us to talk about AI, but really your general public doesn't really want to talk about AI at all. They just want to talk about stuff that works for them. We had a really good example of a young artistic lad that we look after periodically, and he really struggled to communicate with us for many, many years until he got an iPhone. And he's got a writing age of maybe 3 or 4, and now he sends us big, complicated messages because he just talks to the phone and he reads all the messages back, and it's just completely changed his life. Now, he doesn't know what AI is, he doesn't know, but he knows he's got a tool that changes everything he does, which is amazing. So, I mean, maybe some of this is just really about language and how we talk about technology and the benefits. So I should probably ask one of the 2 cool people who are the ones wearing trainers on here, because obviously, as you say,
not just any trainers.
Not just any trainers. You're both looking very cool. But I mean, do you see the sense of the way that we talk about technology, the benefits? Is that maybe the trick to this, is to get talking about it?
It really is. How many people used some Google product today on their phones? So raise your hands. All of us.
Who knew about it?
How many of you woke up in the morning and said, today I'm going to use something about Google? Nobody. We didn't use Google. We found a solution to a problem that we had. Okay, we never buy technology. We think we are buying solutions. Right? We don't buy trainers, we are buying coolness. We don't buy, fancy bags, we are buying hipness. Right? We are buying like a certain look. That's really what it is. My mom isn't buying an iPhone or FaceTime. She's buying an ability to communicate with her granddaughter. And that is the trick, and that's the essence. In fact, Liz, I want to contradict you a bit here. Anyone, I know summer vacations are coming up here. Any of you who are sending your kids to coding camps, pull them out. It's a waste of your money. It really is a waste of your money, because you can pretty much write all that code in an automated way. You should be putting them in camps that teach them how to think, how to construct the right problems to the things they see around them. When the 4-year-old comes and asks us why, what, that's the right thing. We snuff that out as they get older, because we are like, don't ask all those questions, just go like code in Python, because that's going to get you a job at Google. Unfortunately, 10 years from now, sorry, Google code is going to be written by other computers that the engineers already wrote for them, because they constructed the problem set in the right way. So and university education, I don't know about the system here, but I think the US education system, liberal arts schools, is fantastic. I have 2 daughters who've gone through that system now. One's in it, one just graduated. I used to think that, having come from the IIT Indian education system, that I didn't have very high hopes for the US education system. But I look at what they learn. They learn to learn. That is a skill that stays with you for the rest of your life. The calculus, the physics, those are skills and techniques. The half-life is very short. If you're not going to be an analyst working on spreadsheets every day, you'll forget what DCF meant.
But unfortunately, that's what the education system does teach people today.
No, but the schools, these colleges actually are teaching them how to learn. I think it's fantastic. We don't give it enough credit. Maybe not all the universities do it. And the Oxfords and the Cambridges of the world, I think, are set in the same way.
And I agree. I was in a meeting with Treasury a couple of weeks ago, and there was one of the guys there who was come over from Sweden, and we were chatting about the education system, and he said, yeah, I think the education system's great. And the guy from Treasury turned around and he said, where do you live? And he said, in London. He said, that's why you think the education system's great. You look around the rest of the UK and you've got trouble. But actually, Kathryn, I'm sure you would like to dispute the fact that you don't need to learn coding.
Well, I would like to know if anyone has found a coding camp for their kids this summer, because there just aren't that many in the UK, because I receive all the inquiries from anyone who wants one. So I know that, we're not living in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, that ecosystem. And I would argue that actually code is a superpower. And technical skills are a superpower, and coding actually teaches you how to solve problems. And when you take someone behind the screen and you actually get them hands-on with technology, they actually begin to realize the art of what is possible. They can choose to go deeper and maybe become a data scientist or an AI expert, or go do a PhD, or they can just become an incredibly aware and literate CEO of a business that needs to undergo a huge transformation. And that's a big responsibility. CEOs at the helm of companies with tens of thousands of people, especially when those businesses are really genuinely on that burning platform that you talked about. And I would say that a lot of CEOs of big companies sitting on that burning platform are really unsure whether they really are on a burning platform or not. And to be able to understand the impact of how technology can help you innovate and change and upskill is absolutely essential. But we should be very proud in the UK that we got coding on the national curriculum in 2014. It's a fantastic curriculum. I think the next challenge is actually empowering and supporting teachers to bring that curriculum alive in a classroom and giving them all the materials and support that can help them understand how to do that.
Isn't the answer somewhere in between? Because I think you're both right. I'm the consultant. I have to say it depends.
No, that's nice of me.
But the thing is what we're saying is we have to find a valuable problem to solve and a good way to solve it. Some people can think better in code, in Python. Others, if I went in, I'd probably write you 10,000 lines that you could do, and you would just stare at the screen and it would spit something out brilliant. But isn't the most important thing to say, how do we think about what are the right problems to solve, and then deploy the right skill sets against the way to solve that? And sometimes it'll be AI, sometimes it'll be RPA, sometimes it'll be, you know what, that's actually multiplication, and other times it'll be like, you know what, let's go get out some Post-its. I mean, I'm convinced that Silicon Valley and McKinsey are the reason that 3M is still in business, right? A lot of coding starts with Sharpies and Post-its. And then there's somebody who can translate that into code that can turn it into the machine that spits out the most amazing answer or pair of trainers that you are most likely to buy. Or it's something, far more, creative or non-technical. But I think they're all valid. It's just we need to be clear on what is the right language and the best way to solve a problem, and then ideally make sure that we're solving problems that are worth solving.
And I think it's moving on, isn't it? It's not these things, it's just suddenly that's the solution today. As Deep said, we're learning all the time. And if you look at, certainly in the UK, we're looking, there's a lot of people who just need basic skills. What is cyber? What is data? What is AI? Just explaining roughly so they're not scared by it. And then there's a set of people who need to start thinking about it maybe in their businesses. And then the experts, we need the PhDs, and we need the, if we want to lead in these things, we need all sorts of different levels. And that will keep moving on. Languages will get smarter. As you say, computers will start to code for themselves. But Dave, Shiva, you've also got some experience, because I know I went to see WeWork, and you've done a link up with Flatiron as well and whatnot, and the same sort of principle of there's a bunch of companies coming in, and frankly, they do need some people who understand coding and can modify the business. You can have any reflections on how that can work?
I think, there's two sides of this, I think, that get to the middle question as well, which is, there's a big challenge actually getting people to realize these skills have a creative element to them. And so why I have 2 godchildren, and we teach them a little bit of app development. It's not because I want them to become programmers in the future. Maybe they will. But the truth is that this is a pure form of Legos we have for them, because they can imagine any app. And what's stunning is that they always think of an app that doesn't exist today, right? Because that's what youth is all about at the end of the day. So letting them turn something creative, they learn structured logic through that process. They have to form hypotheses, and they have to deal with constraints through that journey, and they come out with an outcome. Yeah. And then the best part is when they design their little chiclet on the phone. It's the most amazing thing, right? Because they'll draw it, they'll come up, and they care about it, and it's always unique. So one side, I think we have a challenge of teaching the workforce through interesting ways, particularly people who are distracted all the time by social media or whatever it may be. Not to disparage it, but there's a huge tension. The other side, when you look at things like Flatiron, people have often invested a tremendous amount of time and they don't see the result of that. So what this becomes is basically an accelerated way to say, here's a skill you can use tomorrow. Data analysis is a good example. Most people don't. They use glib notions of interpreting data, and teaching them to be more sophisticated is huge. But that consolidated, here's how I'm going to get an outcome and a job out of that, is the other thing people are looking for. Particularly when you look at many countries where the education system loads you with debt. And so people are much more frantic about this, if not totally stressed. So I look at those two dimensions, and it's interesting to think about, have we solved them as a society? I don't think so yet.
Yeah, and one of the challenges, I mean, when you look at, in the UK again, just the idea that in the past, if someone was displaced from a job, let's take the north of England, if they were displaced from their job in farming 100 years ago, they went into the local factory, and if displaced from the factory, they went into the local office. The challenge, of course, now is if the job that displaces them from the local office doesn't have to stay in the north of England, it can now appear in Bangalore, Beijing, wherever, Bangkok. So the reality is digital jobs are much more transportable. And so I think at least from a societal and a country perspective, we really do need to ramp up how we provide the skills in the north of England so that when the jobs are displaced, people have got that ability, Kathryn, to go in and say, actually, I've got some other skills that we can use in here and bring them to bear here. And I think, at least from a UK perspective, we probably need to join that up a little bit better than we do at the moment. Yeah. And I think a really aggressive program of reskilling and giving people that kind of sense sounds like a sensible thing to do.
I suppose education is undergoing its own digital transformation.
It is, yeah.
So it is experiencing its own challenges in how to deliver high quality, standardized, scalable, accredited learning that has high engagement and high effectiveness in a digital environment, teaching digital skills. How many different challenges is that?
Yeah, it's great.
But I mean, I love it. I find it super exciting. That's why I'm part of it. But it means that it's not an easy problem to solve.
No, but I think you made the point earlier, and one of the things you do need is incentives to do it, because what's happened in the past is we get more and more supply, new things. And if you ask the average, we did when a lot of the work in digital skills we're doing, we asked the average SME what they thought, and they just said, I don't know, there's just too many things and it's too complicated and I don't even want to start. Maybe if you gave them, £500 per employee to go and do something, I think we need to drive the demand side a bit more. Joanna, have you got a view on this?
I think with all the change that we're undergoing in society and this incredible push to, upskill the workforce, prepare them for this, this next phase, and, people just got their heads around the fact that they needed to learn how to code. And then, as Deep said, realistically, code is a commodity, and much of the real skill and, value add that you can bring to a team, even if you're creating a product, is that creativity and that ability to think and to challenge and to engage on, all sorts of levels. So I think the one thing we need to do is think about how are we inclusive? How do we look at these young kids with all of this burden of how are we going to compete in the world and people telling me this or that, like I'm going to be left out if I'm not the best at, math and science, or, how do we be more inclusive, and how do we focus on their mental health? Because this world is really challenging. I mean, we've had some statistics in the last week or so about the impact of mental health on the rise in suicides. We had some high-profile, even adults this past week who've left the world, unfortunately, and it's a really big issue. There's an enormous amount of pressure on young people, and when you think about it, there are many developments in artificial intelligence. They're able to identify emotion, certainly from your speech. They're able to identify risky, patterns in behavior that might indicate that someone's depressed or on the verge of doing something about that. And I think the big question for society is, what responsibility do we have to look after, young people in particular, but the whole population? You know, I mean, there's so much information that we have, and we're not acting on it. And I just feel like these are really challenging times. We're going through a massive revolution as a society, and we need to think about mental health and inclusiveness, and we need to think about bringing more people along with us. You know, how do we empower, enable, and support, and make sure that this AI revolution is evenly distributed?
Yeah, we're good. Well said. I mean, one of the things that I chaired a panel last week up at TED in Glasgow, and we talked there about a bit about productivity, but actually the premise of the panel was, why don't we have a 4-day week? And the basic principle was, you know, actually our productivity in the UK, again, is low. It's actually a German worker creates the same output in 4 days as a British worker does in 5. So why don't we have a 4-day week? And we had a couple of companies on the panel. There was a lady who ran a company up in Scotland where they actually gave people 4-day weeks. They paid them the same amount, and her productivity went up by 38%. And what she did, but the cool thing about it was that she said, why don't you focus on health and well-being, going and seeing your family, spending more time doing something else? Because actually the quality of your work for the rest of the time is usually higher. We've seen that with job sharing and other part-time working and so on. And maybe we do need to think a bit more radically about some of these, because the societal changes are so gigantic that we need to not just go, oh, let's do the skills the way we used to do them. Let's actually think a bit more radically than that. And I think that sort of, you know, societal change may well be what we need to think about, 4-day week, 3-day week, whatever it might be. Because, you know, that's what happens in other countries. We've seen it in Germany. A lot of the metal workers have decided to go into shorter working weeks. Productivity's gone up. So it's kind of an interesting twist on things, really is.
Unlimited holiday.
Unlimited holiday. We've talked about that at Cisco, saying, why don't you just let people have whatever holiday they want? Because guess what? If you manage people right and give them the right incentives, funnily enough, they do the job, and they maybe even do it quicker than you would have done before.
I have unlimited holiday, and I've had 2 days off this year. But
well, there you
my
go.
Fault. But you know,
No,
there's
that's
something.
an interesting point. I agree.
My bad. But there is something interesting too when you think about the rise of the gig economy, and you think about actually, you know, 100 years ago there were, I mean, either teeny tiny, you know, kind of individuals or very small groups, and then big organizations. But the rise of the gig economy, I think there's 2 interesting points. One is look at Deliveroo. There's a bunch of people going and coding and thinking about UX and UI, but relative to the number of guys on bikes who probably, well, some of them actually probably do code on the side, but there's a huge amount of work being created from this small thing that is creating some stress for, you know, some restaurants, et cetera. But there's a whole tiny little ecosystem or growing ecosystem being built. I think the other thing that's interesting is when you think about the way that adults learn, one is we know that diversity is good, so different perspectives are good, right? So putting the coder and the marketer and the designer and the whatever other, you know, Revenge of the Nerds guy in, you know, you're actually more likely to get to a better answer. And I think that actually there's a really interesting power of this idea of the freelance or gig economy where you'll have more positive displacement of people jumping in and out of roles, bringing skills that actually maybe you could never afford, you know, the super hardcore ex-Google engineer, but actually if he can come in for 3 months and raise the aspirations and the capabilities of some of the guys who are just learning this, that's actually a really positive thing. So I think that there's a lot more room for sort of osmosing of capability and learning without necessarily only relying on formal training programs.
Yeah. Kathryn?
I think it's inspiring, that idea of the 4-day week, because it touches upon this idea that we invented work. You know, the idea of suits and
Weekends.
Monday to Friday and, you know, factories. It was born out of some human being's imagination. So what an amazing opportunity if we look at it a different way of how do we want to live and spend our lives and spend our time and interact with the rest of humanity, and, you know, calling all visionaries, people who genuinely have imaginations that just supersede everything that we can see around us, to begin to kind of paint a picture of how we want to live with each other, because then we should really work back from there and teach people the things that will help get us there.
Yeah, and you know, to Joanna's point, if we make it more inclusive and allow more people to be part of the 4-day week or 3-day week or whatever it is, you know, you bring a very different world. Maybe one of the things we can do to just crystallize this a little bit is, if you were actually advising your children or your nephews or your whatever, what would you tell them you should be doing? What should they do now? What should they learn? And
It's not hypothetical for me. I have, as I said, a daughter who just graduated from college and another one who's about to in 2 years. I tell them very simply that the only constant in life is going to be change, and you have to be ready for it. I think the farm to factory to office transitions happen, but they happen over long periods of time.
Sure.
Right? So I started out as an engineer 30 years ago. I became a product manager 15 years ago, and now I am, an investor 3 years ago. I've made 3 career changes. 2 of them were complementary. One is very different. The third one I didn't have to make. It's still an okay life. Most people in their 30, 40 years, if you can still do what you did and reach a certain level of expertise and sophistication in it, you're okay. My children will not have that luxury. They will have to change their careers every 5 to 10 years, maybe even shorter spans. And so you have to prepare them for it mentally because, it's inevitable. So moaning and groaning about it, fine, do it, but what change, that's not going to change anything. And so that's what I tell them, and, hopefully I'll live long enough to see how they adapt to the change.
See if you're right.
Well, I'd love to jump in on this.
Shiva's
We've been thinking a lot about this, which is, what are the primitive skills someone should learn today, given we have no idea what they're going to do 5 years from now? And we've been laying this out. One is take a design class. The way you communicate and express or visualize data is so critical today, because you're always pitching. A good idea is pitching for resources, et cetera. Second one is a negotiations class. There's still so much unconscious bias in the world, generally speaking. The best negotiator wins, right? I won't comment on our US president, but we won't go there. But I had to. But at the end of the day, it's very important. Most people don't know how to negotiate an outcome that's a mutual win. And it's funny how we degrade into this sloppiness on that front. The third thing is I do believe people have to get much more proficient with data, interpreting data. And that's something that also, it's tough. We learn it over time. We learn about the tools like spreadsheets, but we don't actually make good decisions out of them. The fourth thing that's been the most interesting thing is psychology. So I think a lot it's not about how you build something, it's how you market it today. It's the experience you have around the product. And so when you think about some of the great companies that are very customer-centric, it's actually really interesting psychological training. And I don't mean manipulation. I mean the emotive levers that you can pull one way or the other. And so that's how we've been thinking about, what's the future of a great product person in the future.
I think there's also just a point around saying you're most likely to learn in an environment where you're excited and curious. So if you're really curious about landscape architecture, like I was after I graduated with a degree in international relations, I went and tried it. Turns out it wasn't for me, so I stopped it. But I think that if you had said you should go and learn this thing because it'll be better for you to get a job at McKinsey in 10 years, I might have shot myself in the face if it was something that I didn't really like. Sorry, that was actually really
Not that bad at McKinsey, is it?
But I think the point is you're much more likely to learn and get excited and learn how to problem solve and get creative on something that you're actually genuinely curious about.
Yeah. No, I agree. That enthusiasm, I think people really caring about what they do and feeling, some energy. And I think one of the things I always tell young people about is about communication as well. If you can't communicate now, it's pretty tough in life to say that you're doing it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a presenter in a big hall like this. You just have to be able to tell people, what you're enthusiastic about, how your job works, what you're doing, and so on. I think it's important. Because I do think I do worry still that we're in a bit of a tech bubble here, that we kind of get all this, and there's a load of people outside that we heard in the Brexit debate or in the US election debate that just kind of see all this as stuff that other people do, if you know what I mean. And I think the inclusiveness point that Joanna made is super important. I think we have to somehow make this all feel more accessible to people, and if we're really going to do something. Actually, one of the interesting thoughts about that is I just wonder whether, when I was chatting to a colleague who runs Amazon over here in the UK, and he was talking about the leadership skills you're going to need going forward. And one of the skills that they're thinking about is how you have managers who can manage AIs and humans together. That's kind of an interesting reflection as to what our workforce is going to look like in the future. And how do you manage, the AIs, which tasks you give to them, which tasks you give to the humans, and so on. It's kind of going to be an interesting way of doing things. I don't know whether anybody's kind of got any sense of that kind of leadership side and how this new world of humans and mixed humans and AIs is going to evolve? Any sense of the kind of management skills that you might need for that?
I mean, I think that part of it is, and I think that there's a lot to do in thinking about how do you actually manage that and how do you, frankly, deal with the competitiveness of people saying that's my job. But I think it actually starts with permission and saying, like, I give you permission to be a little bit curious and to figure this out, rather than saying, I know exactly how this is going to work, and on Monday at 9 a.m. you will do this and the robot will do that. And saying, look, we have permission to try to figure this thing out. Because I think it's about unleashing the folks who are like, I really know what problem I'm trying to solve, and I know that there's something out there that can help me solve it. And leaders having the confidence and the trust to say, I'm going to step back and let you try and figure this out. Because actually I think it'll be as much about trial and error as it was about saying, this is exactly what is going to be required to make this work.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very different shape, isn't it, the whole workforce, which I think we have to be thinking about. And as leaders, when you're managing anything, it's a lot about culture and so on. You have to think about, and actually thinking about culture in a world of AIs is kind of an interesting model. Kathryn, did you have some thoughts?
We tend to find that the people who are really seem to be inspiring their entire workforce and undergoing kind of very successful digital transformations, they tend to be quite humble, show that they are willing to learn themselves, and when they say that they want to be a data-driven culture and do data-driven decision-making, are open to the idea that they also will listen to the data, as opposed to that kind of command and control style of leadership that feels a bit kind of 1980s or something. But that seems like I wonder whether the whole job spec of the CEO is going to get rewritten entirely in terms of what is the role of a CEO really? What are they really there to do at a business? Inspire, lead, set the vision, listen to the data. Yeah,
no, I couldn't agree more. So, Joanna, sorry.
I think, whether we're thinking about children, we're thinking about adults in the workforce, leadership, I think we have to skill up on what makes us human. I think we need to think about empathy. We need to think about compassion. We need to think about kindness. Everything is, changing so dramatically that without that sort of, human side of us, I think we're really going to face some real challenges. So just, I guess, my last thing would just be, we need to skill up on what it means to be human.
Yeah, I think you're right. And to pick up Kathryn's point there, I mean, I think the great leaders of today are people who are, much more open. It's a much more open style of leadership. It's an inspirational side of leadership as opposed to a dictatorial side. I mean, clearly there are times when tasks have to be driven, but there's no doubt about it that the shape of the workforce is already changing, and I think this is just going to accelerate it a lot more, where suddenly we bring new components in and new things that are really going to change and give opportunities to do things differently. I think it's a pretty exciting time from that perspective. I mean, I just wonder sorry, did you I'm out of time. Okay, so in that case, oh my God, it's so exciting, there's 10 more minutes. We want more. Well, I was actually going to just ask you a little bit about, going back to the kind of education system a little bit, and not to say that we've got, we've got the solution to it here, but, do you think we need to radically rethink? I remember listening to one of the great TED Talks was by, I've forgotten his name, they're suddenly going out of my head. But, the one about education and Ken Robinson talking about, we kind of educated creativity out of our kids. And it is a really weird kind of sensation that because of the rigidity of the education system, we kind of feel we need to teach kids certain things. And you just feel that there's a kind of new world in here that we have to get to. My view is we've got to get business more involved in education, and and a lot of you do that. But it would be really interesting to see how you've either seen that working or maybe ideas about how we could do more with that going forward. Any ideas, any solutions, just experiences?
It's fascinating. There's I'm frustrated the name is gone, but there's a very popular school in San Francisco. And
school?
I had a look at the
Alt school?
A kind of primary school, and creativity and play and being in nature are absolutely core parts of the curriculum, and it's and a bit of code. But this is the most popular school for all the, all the technology companies are sending all their kids to this school that basically bans technology from the classroom, which I think is interesting. Yeah, we do. I think I said earlier, I think it's a great opportunity to take the best of what is happening in the world. In education and learn from it, what has been successful, and policies, in some of the amazing stuff that's happening in the Nordics in terms of diversity, and actually put together something that looks future-facing. The education system as we know it was created about 100 years ago. No radical innovations have happened since then.
I think there's also, I obviously work more with corporates, and I think the thing that most of my clients get hung up on is this like unbelievable dashboard of KPIs, and you're optimizing for so many things that you wind up optimizing for process compliance rather than an outcome. And when I talk to my teacher friends, both here and in the US and elsewhere, they're optimizing for SAT scores or ERB. I remember taking my first standardized test when I was like 8. AP scores, SAT 2s, and all of these things. And I was optimizing this. Well, now you could probably write an algorithm, but it was essentially optimizing the algorithm to get into Stanford, which is then optimizing the algorithm to get into, fill in the blank and Google if you're at Stanford or whatever. And I think that there's this sense of there are fewer ways to be successful. Or there are fewer paths than actually saying, maybe you are brilliant at math and terrible at coding, or brilliant at storytelling, and you can't, do some to save your life. But I think that there's something around breaking down the acceptable paths of success and celebrating, to use our friends, alternative ways of succeeding. I'm not sure what that means that we do, but it certainly, I think that there's this overemphasis on KPI optimization, which takes you away from focusing on the outcome, which is people who can be successful in today's workforce.
Yeah, I mean, the classic of that in businesses, and a lot of businesses are evolving from this now, is people who wanted everyone to fit into a particular performance curve. And a lot of businesses spend up optimizing everybody to fit into the performance curve, which is kind of like weird, because you actually really want to make people better, so you want to keep pushing. So people get locked in on metrics a lot of the time. The other thing, just to talk about the boardroom, which is interesting, the other end of, you got primary school and education, but in the boardroom, I was on an event, 6 months ago, when there was it was talking about boards and non-execs and all that sort of stuff, and there was at least 2 CEOs in that, if not 3, who said, I wouldn't have a technical person on the board because they would get bored or they'd get fed up with what's going on. And I thought, oh my God, that is really quite scary, because that says that the CEO really thinks technology, let alone AI, and is just something that someone else does and not something that's fundamental to the way. It's probably saying I wouldn't have a finance person or an HR person because they would only care about money or whatever. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know whether you see in the boardrooms, obviously McKinsey, but also with you, Dave, you must see people who are kind of want to do this, but they're not really in the shape to do it yet. A lot of boards have got a strategy, probably from McKinsey, sitting on there somewhere, but a lot of them have not actually implemented it yet or don't really know where to go on that, maybe because of skills again.
Yeah, it's what applies to, the advice we give to our kids about change is even more applicable for organizations. I've had this analysis now done twice over the last 10 years. It turns out that 95% of all technology companies cease to exist as independent entities after 17 years.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about pets.com. Okay? That was an obvious outcome. I'm talking about Netscape, Silicon Graphics, LinkedIn, PeopleSoft, Siebel Systems. I mean, each one of those companies had billions of dollars in revenue at their peak. Billions of dollars in revenue. They created categories such as CRM, professional networking. Many of them still exist as part of some other company, right? Sun Microsystems thriving under Oracle, and LinkedIn is thriving under Microsoft, but they're no longer independent. And on the flip side, you have Google and Facebook and Amazon and even IBM and Microsoft. Cisco. But those companies are not what they were 20 years ago today. They've reinvented themselves because they saw the change coming, they adapted to it, and they reinvented, because you cannot exist in the same format for more than one turn in technology, right? But the same is true for banks. Like financial institutions are getting reinvented as we speak, either by online, by the newcomers like Nubank and Betterment and Robinhood, but then also blockchain technologies, right? We've had all kinds of sessions here about that. So I don't care if CEOs in my boardrooms have a strategy or not. What I do, of course I care, right? But the first thing I need them to have is really this mental model that I need to keep innovating. And I need to be thinking where the puck is going, and that what I'm doing today for my customers and my users and people who are paying me money or giving me their time and attention is going to change.
I think when I think about where boards get it right and where boards get it wrong, I think the ones who get it right are willing to admit, like, we don't know what we don't know, and maybe we should go and do Decoded and just, get completely stuck in. And others are like, you know what, this is a bit embarrassing. I'm going to do some one-to-ones and just say, I'm going to ask all the questions that I should probably be asking my kid, but even that's too embarrassing. So we're going to go Chatham House rules. But I think that where you see the biggest disconnect between, like, my most facepalm kinds of moments are when you say, we want to come and have a board digital strategy day or AI day. And they're like, yeah, you know what I'm about to say, right? And they're like, we need to have virtual reality goggles, and we need to have robots, and it needs to be amazing. And you're like, okay, but the website, like, the checkout breaks one every 4 times. Have you tried using your mobile app? It's shit.
Yeah.
So your strategy needs to be, don't suck, get good, and then reinvent. And okay, that doesn't mean to, like, start, only wait until you're amazing. But if you suck so badly, you're never going to earn the right. He's trying to get you. You're never going to earn the right for people to try the things where you're genuinely reinventing. If you create a reason to say, I'm never going to go back to Google.com.
I agree, and I think that's the trouble. Some people look at, one's a way out here and the other one's just what we do today. But the reality is, I think we probably do need to wrap up, actually. But just to say that, I think Deep said it clearly, which is, change is carrying on. It's going to be here forever. There's no doubt about it, that we somehow need to give people a sense that change is a positive thing, that we're going to position them well for it in the future, that it's not scary, that it's going to help them, and so on. And I do think communication and language and whatnot that we use is a super important part of that. Bernie, I'd just love to thank what amazing panel and all of you for coming along today. It's been brilliant. And if you could just thank our panel, please.